with him kind of went everything she knew about being Indian. She was raised by a white mother. And then when Sean was 11 years old, her father passed away in India. She had only seen him once a year. Now, the last time she saw him alive was when she was 10 years old, and her father decided to pick her up in Seattle, where she was living with her mom, and take her on a trip to India. And so, although Sean is 41 years old for the entire book, there is one chapter where she is a 10-year-old girl. She is with this father, her only Indian parent, on visiting India for the first time. And they make a stop to Agra, where the Taj Mahal is. So this is father and daughter who are not particularly close, visiting the Taj Mahal together. Her mother's skin was a creamy white, like almost everyone's in Seattle. Sean had to claim or be claimed by her mother to prove their shared genes. Complete strangers would ask Sean, "Oh, are you adopted?" They asked her mother, "Is she your stepdaughter?" Here in India, Sean could see herself in her other parent, could match her skin to the skin of so many others around her. For the first time, she looked like everyone else, even though every Indian seemed to know she was an American. Sean and her father joined the crowd and followed along the path. With each step, the dome sprouted higher into the bright, cloudless sky. Its girth widened. When they finally reached the platform, they began a steep ascent. On the terrace, her father pivoted her body, directed her gaze along the banks of a shallow river. "See there? It's called Agra Fort." In the distance, red cylindrical towers kissed low-lying clouds. Walls like decorative curtains strung them together. "That's the palace where Emperor Shah Jahan ruled India," he said. "When Mumtaz died, he built the Taj Mahal here so he could watch over her from Agra Fort. When he died, they entombed him here with her." He paused. "Isn't that a lovely thought? He never wanted to be apart from his wife." The truth of his statement stung. The emperor had never wanted to be away from the queen, but her own father had gone as far away from her and her mother as he could. "I never knew my father," he said. His gaze locked on hers. "Did I ever tell you that?" The words fell out of his mouth, landed with a thud between them. His father, her grandfather. She knew this, though how she came to know it escaped her. She had always seemed to know about this absence in her father's life, much the same way she always knew of her own father's absence in hers. "I've no idea what he even looks like," he continued. "I think about him every day, though." Her father had seemed oblivious to the fact that they shared the same kind of sadness of missing fathers. She wanted to shake him in that moment. His decision to move to India without her had been a selfish one. He still did not see it as such 5 years into his relocation, was wholly unaware of how his absence continued to hurt her, how it made her feel so lonely. For her 8th birthday, he had mailed her a globe, the earth parted by latitudes and longitudes, oceans and continents. She had measured with her hands the distance between Seattle and India. 9 hands. The sun never shone on them at the same time. He had moved so far away from her, he might as well have moved to the moon. When he lifted his face, his gaze traced the horizon, settled back on Agra Fort. "Nothing makes me happier than having you here with me now," he said. "No one has ever meant more to me than you." She smiled. Her first of the day. If these rare moments were all they could ever have together, maybe it would be enough.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. And that actually is a line that I want to talk about in a little while. But the first thing I want to ask you is um, The Parted Earth is, to me, to my reading, a love story in kind of a non-traditional way. It's a love story of Deepa, and you'll tell us what that love story is in a minute. I don't want to give anything away. But it's also about the love of parents and children. It's about the love of homeland, love of family. And you've called the book a tribute. Can you tell us why it's a tribute and to whom, what?
I think in many ways, but when I was writing the book, I felt this need to honor our ancestors and honor the older folks in our lives, those in their twilight years, our grandparents, for example. Especially the women have to the women are the story keepers. They are the memory keepers. They are the keepers of heirlooms. They are the ones who share their histories of growing up, who teach us the recipes that came from a particular culture or ethnicity. They are the ones who listen to us, who make us feel seen, and they oftentimes have traumatic experiences in their lives, and maybe they haven't felt like they could share those experiences with their descendants. So I wanted to write, so the book has several people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that play critical roles in the novel. And I wanted the story to I wanted them to be the vehicle for the story. There's a mystery at the heart of the story, and I decided I wanted to give the older folks the power of revealing what that mystery is, because they are older and they are wiser and they are more patient and they are more willing to sort of have a changed perspective on their own lives and be enlightened by younger folks. So I wanted to, this was sort of an ode to our seniors, our twilight folks, our elderly, however they want to be addressed, and the stories they hold, and whether or not they wish to share those stories or not.
Thank you. Talking about the trauma, and this book is about trauma, and overcoming it, if indeed you can overcome it, or living through it, or coming to recognize it. So I want to talk about the trauma that Deepa and her family, and that everybody in this book in some way experiences. So can you tell us, please, what was partition, and why do you think many Americans are unfamiliar with this history?
It's interesting, because it's not just people living in the country. I have found that people who do not have South Asian roots of some sort, no matter what continent they live in, if they really don't have any South Asian roots, they don't know about partition. So here's what happened. This is in a nutshell. It's a big, big chapter in history. The British occupied what is the subcontinent for a couple of hundred years. First, it was the East India Company, and then it became the British Raj for 80 something years, ruled over India. And when I say India, India wasn't a country then. So India was a landmass. It was a series of kingdoms. It wasn't a nation yet. So, there had been a large movement called the Quit India movement. Many people have heard of Gandhi. He was one of the leaders to that movement. So there was this movement for years to try to get the British out of India. They eventually relented and decided to leave. And then there were many people involved politically, putting pressure to divide this landmass of the subcontinent into two nations. One that would be the Muslim majority nation of Pakistan. And Pakistan then was not just the Pakistan we know it on the northwest frontier. It was actually East Pakistan and West Pakistan. They were the same country, but divided into two parts. East Pakistan is actually now Bangladesh. And then the other nation would be the Hindu nation, majority nation of India. And the Sikhs also were going to live with the Hindus in India. So an attorney who was British came and literally drew a line through in the sand, doing his best to keep most of the Muslim population north and east, and then the Hindu population and the Sikh population further south. But that's not what happened. These were very mixed areas. And so people woke up and found that they were on the wrong side of the border. And there was a mass migration. It's actually the largest human migration in history of Hindus and Sikhs leaving East and West Pakistan, and Muslims who were living in the new nation of India, leaving India and going to Pakistan. 15 million people became refugees almost overnight, and there was so much communal violence. At least 1 million people were killed in what were oftentimes enormous massacres. Some figures put that number at 2 million. And to answer your question, why people don't know about it, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, and this is a reason why I felt really compelled to tell this story, was 60 years passed before there was any sort of formal, widespread effort to collect the stories of survivors. So from 1947 to 2007, there wasn't an organization that was interviewing people about what they went through. So many of these firsthand testimonies were lost, and people didn't get them down before they died. 2007, the Citizens Archive of Pakistan was the first organization to start collecting stories, and then larger organizations came along. In the Bay Area, the 1947 Partition Archive started in 2011. And this is what the organization in my book is named after. I call it the Partition Project, but it's based after the 1947 archive. And they have been incredibly successful in getting survivor stories. The second thing is that mass rape was a major weapon during partition, and that has caused generations of shame and trauma and silence. There was so much violence against women, and people just kept their stories to their hearts. But third, I think part of it is because it's brown people. I mean, we've got a lot of knowledge about World War II being taught in our schools. I think because the Holocaust took place in Europe, that's taught in schools. But, we have not heard, my kids still go through school without learning a lot of history from Black and brown countries. They're not really learning about the Rwandan genocide. They don't really learn much about the Vietnam War, and very little about partition.
Yeah.
And there is a large library of wonderful partition books that are available to people. We now, we have quite a lot of information that we could teach, but I think this is the reason why not, it's one of the reasons why just not many people have heard of it. I mean, I think a lot of people know that the British colonized India and that they left, but
it wasn't that easy.
Know about the aftermath.
Right. And talking about the large library of material that a person can read about this, you've got a suggestion list in the back of this book, and also you did a piece for Electric Literature today, right? That can be found online. Yes. So two things that I want to ask. That line that the British lawyer drew, that is essentially the partition, right? It's like the cutting of the country. I don't know, and that line is what broke some hearts in this book that sets the narrative in motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Deepa, who the novel's divided into three parts. The first part focuses on Deepa, who is 16 and in 1947 living in New Delhi. The second part primarily focuses on Sean, who is, for the most part, 41 years old and living in Atlanta. And then the third part goes through many different decades and several different points of view of characters. But in the first part, the heart of it is that Deepa is falling in love. She's falling in love amidst this chaos. There's a boy that goes to the school next door to hers. His name is Amir. they communicate using origami love notes. So origami plays an important role in the book, and he makes her something and he puts a little note hidden on the inside and leaves it on her parents' porch so that she can read it. So she's falling in love. But the problem is that Amir and his family are no longer welcome in Delhi. They are Muslims, and though they have friends who are non-Muslims in their area, it's not safe for them anymore. So Amir and his family are getting ready to leave to Pakistan. They're going to go stay with a family member in Lahore. And so Deepa is really grappling with the fact that she's falling in love during this time of so much chaos and violence. And she just wants to be a normal kid. She just wants to hang out with her friends and wants to go to school. And she wants to work at her parents' medical clinic. And she wants to be with Amir. But Amir has to leave. And Deepa is terrified about what that separation might mean for them.
I'm sort of torn here because I have all these questions and they're like bifurcated. I want to talk about the making of the novel and the narrative in the novel. And I also want to talk about generational trauma and the need to tell these stories. So let me stick with the kind of narrative, the making of the novel, and then I want to bounce to something else. You mentioned this, and Katie mentioned this at the beginning, is that the Parted Earth, starting with Deepa and Amir, traverses generations, traverses continents, points of view. We're in Atlanta, we're in Agra, we're in Lahore, we're in New Delhi, we're in Amsterdam. I'm not going to tell you anything else. But as the reader goes through this and we land in different eras with different voices, I, for one, never felt unsettled by this. I never had a moment where I was like, wait, what's happening? So I'm really curious, as a novelist, how did you create and maintain what is a pretty ambitious and successfully executed structure? How did you do this juggling?
Thank you so much. I looked to other books. Well, first of all, the novel was written much longer than this because I couldn't really figure out what chapters and what points of view and what cities and what decades were necessary until I wrote a lot more than I needed first. I mean, there are characters that I cut because they just ended up not being essential to the story. There are time periods that I cut, but I wanted to figure out who was absolutely necessary to help unlock the mystery of the heart of the novel. And when I started with this much longer book, and I didn't really even want to write a longer book. I myself prefer novels that are less than 350 pages. So I was not like eager to write like a 350 page, 400 page book, but
252.
Yes, it's pretty short. Yeah. So I wrote a lot more than I did. And then I started asking questions. Both Sean in the present day and Deepa in the past are both very traumatized individuals. Sean's trauma is probably not as big as Deepa's, but she just had a pregnancy loss and her marriage completely fell apart. So I needed to figure out what characters would unlock them in some way. Who would be involved in trying to figure out how to get this estranged grandmother and this estranged granddaughter back together? And once I asked that question, I realized that these other non-essential characters could drop out and that I didn't need more time periods than that. I read Jess Walter's Beautiful Ruins when I was actually in grad school at Queens. That was assigned. And when I saw what happened there, I mean, it's all over the place in time, skips way ahead, goes to different countries. And another book was Sarah's Key. which does the sort of during the Holocaust in France, and then in the present day, a character living a couple generations later. I looked at novels like that, and I tried to figure out how those authors figured out what the essential parts were to tell the story and what the reader didn't do. And it took a lot of time. The structure of the novel did not start out like this. I went from having Sean and Deepa's chapters alternate. So I started with Sean, then went to Deepa, then to Sean, then to Deepa. Couldn't get that to feel very cohesive, flipped it. Then I tried having Sean's story during the first third, and I felt like that ended up being an information dump about partition before we got to Deepa's story. So then this was like the last structure that I tried after trying structure over and over and over again, that seemed to make the story feel really whole and to make the characters have agency, right? They weren't just tools for another character's reckoning, but they actually had their own lives and their own stories. And it was really important for me to have really meaningful secondary characters and not just kind of filler or like the bridge to go from one character to another.
The structure really fascinates me, and I'm, working on something that is also ambitious and has too many pieces. So I'm going back to your book as text now that I've read it for fun. Let me ask you this. You and I are both writers who have committed both nonfiction and fiction. And I'm curious about the challenges and rewards for you in writing in these two genres. And I'm not going to say which do you prefer, because I don't know that that's really a question, but they're different. Committing these two different acts are different. Talk about that a little bit.
So I would say, generally speaking, nonfiction has always come easier to me. And what I mean by that is I wake up with ideas of nonfiction stuff to write, whether it's a reported article or an essay, or, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I should write about this or I should write about that. Fiction, the ideas for stories don't come easily to me. So like, I think I've written like 5 short stories in my entire life. Maybe 2 of them I'm actually proud of. The other 3, I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? It's not instinctual fiction for me. When I wrote The Parted Earth, first of all, I had no idea I was going to write a novel about partition. I had no idea I was even going to write fiction. When I got out of college, the first thing I decided to do was start reading about partition. Just as me, I was starting law school. I ended up practicing law for 5 years. I was just like, this is a part of history that I got learned nothing about in high school and college. I'm going to start reading. So I started with fiction. I think the first book that I found in the bookstore was Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. So that was the first one I read. So I just started reading about partition in 1995, okay? Didn't even start writing until 2000, about 2000, 2001, started seriously writing. I was still an attorney at the time. I was only writing nonfiction. I could not come up with an idea for a story if, my feet were held to the fire. Just had no idea. But I kept reading about partition. I then switched to nonfiction. I was just doing this in my own time. I was taking a SEPTA, which is the public transportation in the Philadelphia area, and I was just reading on my lunch. And again, no idea for a partition story. My first internet search was partition. I was like, I want to find out where the survivors, what are their stories? I started researching online. I was reading old articles from newspapers in India and looking for survivor stories. I tried writing and selling a couple nonfiction books. I then wrote my first novel wasn't about partition. It took place in the North Georgia mountains. Then in 2011, after I had been reading partition for 15 years, still with no intention whatsoever about writing about it, I took my husband and my daughters to India for the first time. It was for my cousin's wedding. I had not been in 19 years. I was going to India for the first time when both of my grandparents had passed, and my grandmother had most recently passed. And when I landed in Delhi at the airport, I just felt like just kicked in the gut. It was almost like I felt like my grandmother had just died again, because it was easy for me to sort of cope when she was so far away. But when I realized I was in her country and she was no longer alive, I had this fresh wave of grief. So we went to the Taj Mahal, and I got to the Taj Mahal, and I was standing on the western part of the terrace, and I realized that I had stood in that exact same spot with my grandmother the last time I was in India. And when I was standing there, the sun was setting, and my three little kids were running around and chasing each other. And I just had this really strong sense of her being with me. And then I had the idea of this grandmother and this granddaughter who were apart and couldn't be together. And 3 weeks later, when we landed back in the States, I had pretty much the entire idea for the novel in my head. I didn't even start writing it until the following year, but that's when I really just had this story come to me. And I don't think if I'd ever just sat down and been like, oh, what should I write about? Maybe I'll write about partition. I don't think the novel would have come to me. It's just that I had 15 years of reading about partition and kind of researching it independently.
Stewing on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Katie, I've got like 2 more questions, and then should we go to Q&A? And by the way, the question about fiction and nonfiction came, Anjali, from me, but was supported by our mutual friend, Jennifer Nisline. So hi, Jennifer. So 2 quick questions. On the topic of grandparents, my maternal grandfather was born in prison in Siberia in 1904, and he would never speak about it. And so now most of what I know, and everybody who would know about that is long gone, because apparently I am now an elder. But most of what I know about that experience is either ephemera that I've collected or weird family stories that can't possibly be right? So one of the things that I'm curious about is, the Parted Earth revolves around generational trauma.
Mhm.
And what, you were talking about older people and what they can and can't talk about and that kind of thing. So how do we encourage family members who carry trauma to talk about their stories, and why is it important? And that kind of loops back to, why doesn't anybody know about partition?
Absolutely. So, what is really fascinating about archives is a lot of times that people live through trauma, they don't want to talk about it with anyone they know and love. Like, they don't want to tell their children or their grandchildren or their siblings they want to keep it to themselves. But it is oftentimes easier for them to tell a complete stranger. And these archives that are around, where you have a historian who's coming with their video camera for you to tell their story, that oftentimes opens a portal in people, because they don't feel the shame, right? If they're telling somebody who's a complete stranger and they're frightened and they're triggered and they're full of anxiety, some people that just releases when they talk to a complete stranger. And there are many, many survivors of partition who did just that. As soon as a stranger came involved who was documenting it for history, right? That also made survivors feel, a little bit of an obligation, right? Like, this is for history. It's not just for my family. It's for history. They open up, and it's a real shame that these archives were not around for so long, because if they had been, it might have been easier for people who were so traumatized to talk to somebody that they'd never met before than it was to tell their family, because telling your family something traumatic is very vulnerable. It's scary.
And they may feel that they're going to frighten their child, their grandchild, or embarrass themselves in some way.
Absolutely.
The research, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, what I was going to say is, I remember you telling me the story of it was your grandfather, right?
My mother's father, yeah.
So I remember you telling me that story, and in the novel, I made the deliberate choice for Sean to not know anything about her Indian family history, because what I wanted to show was that this generational trauma, it not only affects people who know everything about their family and know exactly what violence they might have endured, it actually affects the people who know nothing about their history. It can be very traumatic to not know anything about their history. And Sean, in fact, what she comes to find is that what she didn't know actually played a huge role in her own trauma, in her own life in the present day.
Yeah.
It's what we don't know can be as heartbreaking and can cause so much grief and trauma as if we did know what happened to our ancestors.
Yeah. Here's my last question, although we could talk about this, like I could talk about this for like 4 hours. So when we are back out in the world, you and me, we're gonna go back out for lunch when everything calms down. Last question, research.
Oh.
Sean plays a huge part in this novel. As I tell my students, she's not real. You have her undertake research, and Chandani, I think,
Yes.
is it Chandani who sees what happens to Harjeet? She sees the video. So talk to me about the research that Sean does and how you used research, her active research, to bring the threads of the story together.
Absolutely.
How research is a tool in the narrative.
Absolutely. So this was a little bit of an autobiographical thread, because I had spent years trying to read firsthand testimonies of survivors and not finding any, even when I finally became an active user of the internet, right? So I thought, gosh, I have had such a hard time doing this myself. How would I approach this if I was Sean in the novel? And Sean inherits from her father this like shoebox of old things that his landlord in India had shipped her back. And that's where she starts. And then she starts looking online, trying to guess where Deepa might have lived last. When Sean knew her, she lived in London, but she has a very common last name, so it's impossible for Sean to find her. But luckily, her neighbor Chandani used to volunteer in a library and used to help people, figure out how to find those they were searching for. And Chandani, she's like, oh, I remember, what would they do if they were looking for Sean? And that's the question she asks, is what if Sean's ancestors were looking for Sean? How would they go about it? And so it takes Sean and Chandani together with help with another character who Sean tracks down called Gertrude, who is an Austrian who survived the Nazi occupation of Austria and then relocates to London. The three of them are able to sort of piece the puzzle of what happened to Sean's grandmother. But yeah, I mean, when I was reading about partition and when I was reading about people's stories, I would see accounts of, I would read accounts of how people were tracking down information. And I really wanted to highlight that because, this is a present day thing that there are more resources on the internet. There's, 23andMe, people are using all kinds of resources today to track down their ancestors and learn about their histories. And so I really wanted that to be a part of the novel as well.
And it works so well. It brings everything together at the end. Katie, shall we go to questions? I know that we have a few.
Yeah. I would like to encourage everybody. This is the last call for questions. If you have a question for either of our panelists tonight, please drop it in the Q&A, and I know they would love to answer those. I have, like Jessica, I have a million questions, but I'm gonna choose one for you now. So you two are friends. You're both Atlanta residents. You're both writers. And earlier today, Anjali, I was watching another virtual event that you did recently. And in that event, you said that without meeting Jessica Handler, you may never have become a writer.
No.
She said that it's recorded and I watched it on the internet. So I would love for you to talk about, this is a question for both of you, but the importance of having a community of writers and having support from other writers, and where I know many people watching tonight probably are aspiring writers, practicing writers, and where and how would you look for that kind of community if you don't have it and you want it?
Go, Anjali, you do it.
Well, first of all, the internet doesn't lie. What I said about Jessica was absolutely true. If I did not find Jessica and other folks like her, this was a very long journey for me. I would have quit, absolutely 100%. It was just too heartbreaking of a journey for me for too long. And I was on the verge of getting out of it. But what I did was I joined a great local organization here called the Atlanta Writers Club, and they had meetings a couple times a month, and they organized classes, and that's where I met Jessica. She taught a class about 6 or 9 months after I moved to Atlanta. So I attended in-person events, which were good for me. Now, I know a lot of people who find their writing community online. They join, they're in various Slack groups, they're in Facebook groups. A lot of people find each other on Twitter and create Twitter groups. So, the most important thing to me as a writer is to have a community of cheerleaders, to have people who really nurture me as a writer, but also kind of hold me accountable. Like, oh, you didn't finish that chapter yet. You said you were going to finish it. Gentle reminders that the name of the game is to keep writing, right? At the end of the day. And I've been, paying Jessica's kindness forward, because Jessica had not read a single word of my writing, but was just instantly so supportive and so convinced I was going to publish a book. And when somebody has that kind of faith in you and they have no basis really for that faith, it really does something for you as a human being. You're like, wow, am I special? So
you had something to say.
But I didn't know I had something to say, and you saw that and you hardly knew me at all. And so I try to be that way with my students or other writers who I meet, because I'm like, that's what I needed. And where would I have been if I didn't get that from you? Would I have kept on this as long? I don't know. I'm just so grateful that we met, and I'm so grateful that you nurtured me the way you did, because I really feel like that's a huge part of why I'm here.
Thank you. I would add to that, since Anjali and I are both teachers. I teach undergrads and I've taught in the graduate world, and you teach in an MFA program. I would say that in addition to, in college or graduate school or even a writing workshop, there's so many of them that a person can go to now online as well as in person for a day, for a weekend. Another thing is your local independent bookstore, which hand sells to you and knows what you like to read. And I don't know if Midtown Reader does this, but I know that other bookstores that I've been involved with, if somebody goes in and says, hey, who else is reading this book? Or who else is coming to this book event with an author if there's a live event? You start to realize there's a community, and you start saying, oh, hey, I kind of know that person, or I've seen that person, or hey, you just bought The Parted Earth? I just bought The Parted Earth. We should get together and talk about it. Oh, you write? I should write, or I like to write. So you've got to do a little bit of the heavy lifting yourself. But when you find a group of people who you respect and who respect your work, you got the ball rolling. Yeah, so go to your local independent bookstore.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I think we're going to go ahead and close it out. Thank you both so much. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you, everyone.
You.
Y'all have a great night.
Y'all, thank you so much. This was great.
For coming.
Bye.
My internet held up.
Awesome. Awesome.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.